Hello, I'm going to talk about my Lord of the Flies project, which is about comparisons of dictatorship and Jack Marridew. So first off, defining dictatorship. Dictatorship, a key structure in it is where one person or a small group of people have total control over everything, and this leader has not been elected, but instead inherited their position from family members or used force to take control. So pretty much a leader has like total control over everything. And the part where it says that they have not been elected is pretty much true, like Hitler and where he like took control, but then talking about like inherited position from family member, which is similar to Kim Jong Il, which is the dictator that I have. So starting off governmental system comparison number one. In both the governmental dictatorship and the government we see on the island, where you see leaders who give themselves power over everything. So like pretty much they just have total control over anything that happens on the island. So the quote, "These seemingly monopolize decision making and conform to stereotypical notations of dictatorships as one man rule." And that is from the dictatorship passage on Galen Context, I believe. But it's basically talking about how like a stereotypical dictator is like one that just uses their power for bad, and they just like are harsh, like what we see as in Hitler. But then the comparison in both the governmental, yeah, I already read that. But and then the quote, so that one was for the passage. This one is from the book. So it says, Jack turned to Ralph and spoke between his teeth. See, they do what I want. This is from later in the book where Jack has already taken full control over everything. And pretty much it's like where he's standing on a throne and the boys are just listening to him and doing whatever he says and like fanning him with big leaves. So that shows us how like he's taken full control over everything and he has absolute power, like we see as a dictator. And then so both quotes show that dictators and Jack want complete control. The quote shows how dictators take control over everything. And the quote from Lord of the Flies shows how Jack controls the boys to do what he says. Both show that leaders can be controlling and abuse power when given. So this part right here, abuse power when given, is talked about a lot because as we see in the book, he really is abusing his power as he's kind of like mind controlling them just to like do whatever he wants, as well as Kim Jong Il, the dictator. Yeah. And then the second comparison in both the governmental dictatorship and the government we see on the island, leaders who abuse power for their own benefit. So this is pretty much talking about how leaders just don't really care what their people have to say, and they tell them to do everything just in their benefit, like to better themselves instead of the people. So the quote from the passage is, "This lack of accountability allows dictators to make immoral decisions for their own personal gain." Pretty much what I already stated, how they just do everything for themselves. And then the quote from the book, "Jack painted and garlanded, sat there like an idol. There were piles of meat on green leaves near him, and fruit and coconut shelves full of drink." So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, how he's using like imagery to show us that Jack has fully taken over everything, and he's like on his own little throne, where the boys are just there to fulfill like what he wants instead of what they want. Like as we can see, um like green leaves, like like in the olden days, like kingdoms where you would see people fanning the kings. That's pretty much like what this is comparing to. So both these quotes show how leaders abuse power for their own benefit. The quote from passage shows how dictators abuse power for their own gain and how Jack is living in luxury while the other boys provide this for him. These both show how both leaders are selfish rather than caring about others. And then Kim Jong Il. So this is the leader that I'm going to be talking about. So Mercury, oh my God. Okay, so Kim Jong Il is the leader that I have, the dictator. Kim Jong Il is the son of the previous dictator of North Korea, Kim Il sung. And Kim Jong Il, he ruled from 1994 to 2011, which is when he died. And he was a ruthless and harsh dictator, which was hated and disliked by many. He was widely seen as a bad leader due to his terrible decision making and the faults he created for his nation. So, pretty much, just no one liked him because of the decisions that he made. People didn't think that they were good for his people. And he later ended up causing many like casualties. But so oh, the quote is Kim Jong Il was an inexperienced leader who lacked respect. Pretty much like self explanatory. People didn't like him, and he was disrespected by many other leaders and people. And then the quote from the book is I ought to be chief, said Jack with simple arrogance. Because I'm chapter chorister and head boy, I can sing C sharp. Another buzz then, said Jack. I cut off. So pretty much Jack, at the very beginning of the book, when all the boys first get on the island and they're deciding the leader, Jack wants to become the leader. But since everyone just liked Ralph more and he was more respected and seen as a good person, people voted for him instead of Jack. But later we know that Jack fully takes control over everything, so it didn't really turn out too good. Both show how Kim Jong il and Jack wanted respect at first, but did not gain it so easily. And the research quote shows how Kim Jong il was inexperienced and not respected because of it, similar to how Jack was not voted chief because he lacked respect, and both leaders had to fight for respect from other people. It's pretty much referring to like how at the end of the book where Jack took over everything and had to like fight for it, and even when he kept him captured. But comparison two, both Kim Jong il and Jack had flaws in their society. So, quote from the passage is North Korean economy was faltering, a steady stream of refugees and defectors was leaving the country. So this is talking about how like refugees, people that escape. So like Kim Jong Il had many people trying to escape from his society, and that was like a very big flaw. It could have led to like information getting out that he didn't want people to know about, as well as like hurting their economy because they have less people. But quote from the book is look at that, call that a signal fire. That's a cooking fire. Now you'll eat and there will be no smoke. Don't you understand? There may be a ship out there. This is at the end of the book where Ralph is kind of mocking Jack because their fire, what they were going to use to try and escape and call like as a signal to call a ship. But we could see that like Jack's wasn't really good because maybe he wasn't trying to escape, but he just liked living in paradise because he was just controlling everything. But that's a major flaw because it didn't really lead to them getting saved. It was more of like the giant fire on the actual island. Okay, both Kim Jong il and Jack had problems with their societies. The research quote shows how North Korea's economy was falling apart, and the quote from Lord of the Flies shows Jack's group making dumb mistakes that are ultimately not going to help them later. And both show how poor leaders can cause a society's downfall. So, the thematic conclusion is Golding's idea that the defects of society are traced to the defects of human nature are proven in this research. We see this because both the dictators in real life and Jackson in the novel show how greed, selfishness, and inexperience all lead to the group's downfall. This shows that the issue is not their choice of government, but instead the leaders at fault. A society can be good only if their leaders are good and smart.